Okay, I think we're ready to get started, everyone. We're at about 3:05, but we have a lot of material to cover today. Just to kind of walk us through, we promised to deliver a lot of goods to you last time, and so hopefully we're going to be able to do that. And we were also challenged to, hey, let's talk about some of these things in greater detail. And so hopefully we can start that as well. So we want to do a brief welcome from Tim before we get started. I do want to remind people in the room that if you are going to speak, make sure that your mic's on. You'll know that it is if it has the green halo lit. If you need to cough or you don't want somebody to hear you, you can always turn that off and it'll go to red. But we'll go ahead and get started. It is May 26th and it is the CAC meeting for the zoning code rewrite. So
can I ask about housekeeping?
Yes.
Can we see quick who else is online?
Yes. So we
just because I know you're there, but I don't.
Yeah. We have Andy Erstad. We have Chris Vanderstowe, Don Elliott, Francis Fuji, Gabby Hart, Kelly Tagg, Marissa Keith. And we also have, that's not showing, Richard Llewellyn and Marissa Keith. And we also have 2 attendees that will hang in there and hopefully we'll get to hear from them at the very end.
Hello, everyone.
So I'm going to hand it over to PDS Director, Timothy Keene.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. Should I stand somewhere in particular? Am I supposed to? Okay. First of all, I want to thank you again for doing this, everybody that's here on the committee. As I said before, I recognize what incredible public service this is to spend your lives volunteering to talk about the zoning of your city. So thank you very much. And want to give a lot of thanks to Lena and Andrea and Deanna in particular, who've been hard at work since you last saw them, seeking to come forward with some ideas today related to the zoning, which really goes back to modules 1 and 2 and proposes, based on the feedback we've heard and through this public process, let's think about some ways to do this that might be, we think, more in the direction of an approach that solves the problems we're seeking to solve, but in a way that's commensurate with the physicality of the city versus more of a cookie cutter approach to the zoning. So they have to go through with you today some, fairly detailed, I'd say, explanations of where that's evolved since you last discussed this. And this is good, so you all can get into some detail here. It's not just high level discussion. It's get into the weeds a little bit and talk through what of these solutions you think are good ones and give us some direction on how to continue to pursue them. Because the idea is that we're going to be working with this committee to work through these ideas such that we can get to some additional public meetings, even in the summer, to start talking with residents of Boise on these issues. I mean, our commitment is to get to a zoning ordinance that really achieves the things that have been discussed that seem to have a lot of consensus around them in the city, but do it in a way that people can feel like we're taking this inordinate amount of time and making this huge investment into something that is consistent with where we want this city to go specifically. And that's what we want, so that as we get into the third phase of this, which is looking at processes, ideally we're all sitting here thinking, okay, in that third phase, and as we discuss processes, how can we make these things as simple to do as possible, because they're in the direction that we want for the city. So it's an important presentation and discussion with you today, and look forward to your feedback and direction on where things have gotten. So appreciate it. And that is it.
Thanks, Tim. I'm just going to do a little bit of a recap. We kind of talked about this last meeting and then where we're at right now, and then the steps kind of moving forward. This is our outline for today. I'll kind of go over the outreach summary. Deanna will go over the proposed Module 1 and Module 2 framework changes. And then next steps, as Tim said, kind of some of that summer and what to expect from us upcoming. And then any comments and discussion that we're going to have after that. So just kind of as a recap, again, the extended community outreach that we did over the winter and early springtime. We went to each neighborhood planning area and had 7 of those meetings, and then several other stakeholder meetings throughout the community as well, and a large survey that was taken by the community, as well as more technical experts like you all. And appreciate all those feedback. We had a lot of comments that we've kind of sifted through from all different members of the community, and that's really important as part of the entire community engagement process as we go through this. So if you remember, we did a Module 1 outreach summary. That was probably about last spring. We have a summary report that is about 95% done. I have copies available here. It needs to go our graphics team before we kind of publish that on our website. That'll also include all of the public comments that we received from both of those surveys. There was about 5,600 comments that people put in that survey. So those are all organized by questions and then people's responses as well. You can use that time to read those comments if you'd like. But of course, we'd like to present this to the community and make sure it's accessible for everyone. So that should be ready probably next week or two. But I do have a copy of the Word version here before that kind of gets finalized and prettied up. So it's a little bit rough, but you can still pretty much get the entire report together. Really, I want to talk about, and this is kind of how we'll look to move forward as well, some of the overarching themes that we had from community outreach and in the survey. They're pretty in line with one another, of the same kind of overarching themes that we heard. Protect sensitive lands. As we all know, the foothills area is really important to us, and that was a voted number 1 on one of the questions, without a doubt, that protecting some of those sensitive lands is very important to the community. Climate action is also important, thinking about the type of development that we have and where we put it, and trying to keep a sustainable future for us. That transition from commercial areas to residential is also very important to residents. We heard that whatever that looks like, we're still trying to figure that out. Dana will kind of touch on some of those as well. Connectivity, how people get around the city, whether that's walkability, bicycling, cars, all different types of connectivity. But as Tim, kind of mentioned, making sure that everybody's connected in the community. Not all areas of Boise are the same. As we went to each of those neighborhood planning areas, that's just one thing that we kept hearing over and over. Each different part of the city has different characteristics that people enjoy, whether it's certain parks, whether it's community centers, activity centers, and it's important to recognize those and kind of not have like a blanket approach that we presented earlier this year. The number 1 topic, and this was true in the survey as well, that reduction in parking that we presented was a very hot topic throughout all of our meetings and in the survey as well. And then the removal of the density calculation as well. People, I think it was just a little bit unsure in their heads of what that actually meant. So from here, I'm going to kick it over to Jessica to say a few words.
Ooh. Fancy. Okay, so it's good to see you guys all again. And this is kind of the framework that we wanted to lead with to convey the pivots that we're making, or the changes that would be different from the draft that you saw in January, February, March, after the community feedback, survey feedback, your feedback. We feel pretty good about the groupings of these 4 ways that we want to see in the code express the changes that everyone was looking for. So the first is really this recognition and hearing from the community and you all that we have great neighborhoods and they're very different from each other, and we want to preserve that variety in a way that they can continue to be great. Doesn't mean that they stay exactly the way that they are right now and that they'll never change, but that we don't just apply a cookie cutter approach across the city and hope that the quality and the variety of those neighborhoods stays the same. So being kind of intentional about where growth is and what kind of growth that is. And so the second piece leads more explicitly then into that direction of growth, and really thinking about then, well, where are the places in the city that there has been public investment, or there's planned investment, and how do we focus the growth to be directed in those places? And then what does that look like? The third is really thinking through how, if we have these goals around climate change, climate action, and housing affordability, how do we really ensure that we have a strategy to produce those type of projects to meet our goals? And so we'll walk through some of the incentives or performance enhancement strategies that we're looking at with different kinds of housing and mixed use areas. And then to share with you all today an approach we would like to take to really recognize that we don't want to develop everywhere. Tim has said this pretty much right from getting here, that we have great places, and then the places that we love, we should be thoughtful about how we protect those places, specifically in the foothills and then south of the city as you get out into the desert area. So we'll share with you an approach we want to try today on that. If you go to the next slide. And I don't know if Deanna, you're going to start to jump right in on that of what we mean, but happy to give you the mic or. Oh, clicker and mic. Oh yeah. I think I did it. Okay, there you go.
Okay, cool. And we feel good to keep going? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay. So Jessica kind of outlined the framework, and we have spent, like Tim said, the last month really saying, okay, if this is the direction that we want our code to go, how do we then actually get the code to realize that this direction, this framework? So I'm going to walk through what we all try to balance between, all right, this is how it connects to these framework items. How do we get nitty gritty enough so you could see how we're pulling levers within the code to realize this idea of great cities have a variety of neighborhoods. So you'll see we added R1A back in. That was one of the big feedback items we heard was you're getting rid of our R1A, large lot zoning district. So we've added that in, recognizing that we do need to have a variety of neighborhoods within our city. And you'll see all of those dimensional standards have stayed exactly the same as they are in the current zoning code. And same with the allowed uses. So currently in R1A, you can do a single family home, you can do a duplex, and you can do an ADU. You'll also see on that top column that I've circled density. We also added the density calculation back in, really to provide that predictability for our residents so that they can understand the density that's going to be within their neighborhoods. And so R1A has stayed the same. R1B is the same as what is currently in the code and what we presented to the community. One of the big things I do want to pull out, so you'll see allowed uses, which is the fourth row. Previously in the last draft, we said you could do up to a fourplex in all neighborhoods. And that was really the cookie cutter approach we talked about, that we should increase supply generally everywhere in the city. And by increasing allowed housing types, that will help us address some of our affordability issues. And we got some great feedback from the community of, you're going to just get a very expensive fourplex in an R1B neighborhood. And that's not what we want. And so we took that to heart. And so what we'll talk about a little bit later is we're creating a requirement that if you do want to do a fourplex in an R1B neighborhood, it has to be affordable and it has to be sustainable. So we're going to get a deed restricted affordable housing unit there in that neighborhood. So it's really directly connecting the goal to have fourplexes. If we are going to have them, we have to have the right type of housing that we want. So that's the play between allowed uses and then allowed with this sustainability and affordability. One of the big changes that you will see is height. There is variety across the residential zoning districts in height now. Previously, it was almost all the same height. So this will be a difference for a lot of our community members. The larger lot residential areas are still 35, which is what they are currently. But as we move into more of our urban neighborhoods and neighborhoods where we are closer to areas that have investment, we want to allow more development potential within those areas. So we have quite a bit of a higher height limit. As well, We've decreased minimum lot size for R1C, which so to make it a bit more consistent with the city's traditional lot platting. So our R1C neighborhoods are really our traditional neighborhoods, and that should align more closely with the traditional lot pattern of Boise. Yeah, so that's that. This is the variety of neighborhood, and you'll get this, but we've been working off of, this is our framework to really realize more variety across our neighborhoods and recognizing that, you know, we want large lot neighborhoods to urban neighborhoods. And I have the clicker. So then the next phrase was direct development where there's planned public investment. And then, so we heard, you know, how do I know that when we get higher density or higher mixed use developments, it's going to be areas that have the infrastructure to support the new residential development. So we took a list of, okay, where are areas that we have investment or have pretty immediate plans for investment, and let's make sure that that's where we're growing and that's where we're having the best, highest urban development that we can. So obviously it's downtown. We have a ton of investment in downtown, and we want to make sure that as we have new development there, it is reaching that, which is the dark blue. We have identified State Street transit nodes. So we've been working on State Street for decades to make that realized into a very urban, rapid transit area. And we have been continually to invest in that, especially with the creation of the URD along State Street. So that's really providing a financing mechanism to implement a lot of the infrastructure that it's going to need as we build out more intense development there. And there's 4 transit nodes. And so that's where we've envisioned clusters of more urban development for bus rapid transit stations. Then we also have our best in class transit routes. Many people may not know this, but we have routes in Boise that run every 15 minutes during the commute hours. So these are places that if you live within walking distance to Vista, you may be able, and you work downtown, you can easily take the bus, or some folks, you can take the bus every 15 minutes back and forth between your homes. So we want to see the most intense development there to help support that investment. We have our pathway corridors, the Greenbelt and Federal Bikeway, the Federal Way Bikeway. These are great investments that we've already built within the city for bike and ped infrastructure. And we should be putting people closer to that so they can bike and walk to where they need to go. And then we have our regional and activity centers identified in Blueprint Boise. And those are places that we're envisioning to be dense, urban, or not necessarily super dense, but those are where we're seeing community activity, right? This is where we want to have a spot that every community, every neighborhood could walk or access goods and services nearby where they live. And so I'm going to click through some of these things. So I walk through all of the investment areas. So you'll see now we've created zones that align directly with those investment areas. So we have MX5, which is the mixed use downtown. And that's what we're taking now within the downtown planning area. Anything that was zoned commercial, C2, C3, et cetera, RO will become MX5 within the downtown planning area. We have our MX4, which is mixed use TOD, which are the 4 TOD stations along State Street. Those will become MX4. And then MX3 is everywhere those other investment areas that I described, the best in class transit, the pathway system, and our activity centers, those are MX3. And this is where we really want to see our community invest in growth. And, you know, in order to have that variety of neighborhoods everywhere else, we want to see our growth at these investment areas. And you'll see we've raised the height limit for MX3. So that would maybe have been a lot of areas that were previously zoned C2. We've raised that height limit now to 60 feet. And then, of course, there's a lot of other types of commercial within the city. We know that we don't always have to have the most intense mixed use development. So we have what we called mixed use general, which is really what we kind of see happening in Boise right now. We know people are going to want a car wash, are going to need a car wash, going to need a drive-through restaurant, right? It's not going to disappear from the city. We're just going to focus that type of auto-oriented development at MX2. So those are the commercial areas that exist now that aren't in those investment areas. So we can have less intense development there. As well, we have MX1, which are going to have high pedestrian design standards. And those are neighborhood serving mixed use commercial areas. There's a lot of currently in the city LOD, which is limited office, neighborhood office, some of those smaller scale commercials those will become MX1, and they'll have requirements for great streetscape so that they're a walkable area in every neighborhood, ideally. So this is another thing, as we're moving towards this framework of moving growth to where we have investment, we recognize that this is going to set us up to potentially have some conflict because we have low density areas and areas where we need to focus our growth on so that we can maintain other areas to have that variety of neighborhoods and not develop everywhere. So we recognize there's going to be conflict, especially when it's within that 1/8 mile 1/8 mile buffer, which is about 1 block. So we're only thinking 1 block off of State Street. If we're going to allow a building up to 60 feet on State Street, that's going to create a conflict between perhaps the existing low density housing and that 60-foot development. If we limit the potential of that new mixed use zone because of the existing single family home, we're not realizing the growth that we're hoping to achieve in those investment areas. So our recommendation is to convert low density zones with just within those buffers, that 1/8, which is 1 block from State Street or Vista, to a more urban residential zone. So it's still residential, but we would move them from, say, R1C to R2 so that that residential property could also realize the higher intensities and we can see investment within that residential area. So, and it's very small, you can't see it, but it's not a dramatic amount of property, but there are some existing lower density areas within that 1/8. So this is kind of our scheme of where we're going to be seeing mixed use to development and more urban development within the city. So it still leaves a great amount of the city as it currently is. And so then the next framework was to really, a great city has a strategy to explicitly produce affordable and sustainable development. And this was really in response to a lot of our communities saying, we're just increasing development potential. And are you getting affordable and sustainable housing? So we want to come up with a solution to really bake in incentives for the type of development that we want. So as I said, in those lower density, large lot and suburban traditional zones, so R1A, R1B, R1C, we have now said you cannot do a triplex or a fourplex unless you give us affordable and sustainable housing. And it's explicitly requiring that affordable and sustainable housing. So if you wanted to do an triplex in R1B or R1C, one of those units would have to be affordable to someone earning 80% area median income or less. As well, we worked with our public works team to say you have to have it be affordable and it has to incorporate 3 of these sustainable building features. So it's going to support clean energy, energy savings, and water savings. And then our next one was in that mixed use transit oriented development. So MX4 will remove, will allow the development to go above 60 feet. So it could go as tall as it needs to, like in downtown development. And we would also say where there is no minimum parking requirement if 25% of those units are affordable to households earning 60% area median income below. So we're going to be getting a very deeply affordable unit and a large amount of them in that product, as well as they would have to incorporate those sustainable design features that we've worked to identify. And then just reminding, this is actually a current incentive that we already have, but recognizing we want to maintain some things that some buildings as they are, so providing an incentive for adaptive reuse. And then our last framework is we don't want to develop everywhere. So a lot of what I've just described is our efforts to not develop everywhere by concentrating growth in areas where we have investments. But additionally, we've introduced a new O3 zone, which is ideally going to become more of a managed land so that we can really focus on our fringes and to control and have very, very low density or no development land out using that zone district. As well as we are going to introduce a wildland urban interface overlay. We didn't have that in the previous draft, and this is going to provide strict development standards for how you develop basically at the intermingle between the wild and the urban. So making sure that we're fire-wise as well as treating our animals sensitively. And this is going to be in module 3, but we're really charged with this is being careful about not just annexing, but having very strict policies about when we would annex and how we would provide a base zone district with that. So we don't have anything in paper on the annexation yet, because that would be in module 3. So that's a lot of information. And I think the rest of the session is just discussion.
Yeah, and I think we'll just start with, like, what do you think about the framework? Does it match what we heard with the outreach summary? Do you have concerns with a specific piece of that, or how it might be integrated into the zoning ordinance? Or maybe you're really excited about something that we talked about and how it will integrate. So we'll just kind of open it up to the group. And I know Roberta had her hand raised.
I jumped ahead to beyond the discussion as to how I'm going to process all this. Like, for instance, when you were going through the new zoning areas, this was my cheat sheet, and how will you do a translation in the next revision of the module to explain what the current is and just jump to what we have now? Because that would work for me. Well, if that's going to work for everybody else, because you could, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to process all this when you release the revised draft. So what do I expect and how you explain it to me?
Ultimately, I think the story will be what you saw today. What you'll see reflected in the zoning code will ultimately be, you'll be able to track that via footnotes. You'll see very similarly. So where you had, MX1 was once LOD, once C1D, all of those things will still be intact for you so that you can see how they have transitioned. You probably won't be able to see the multiple transitions that have happened. So from existing to our first attempt to now, we think we've got it right because we've heard from the public and we have really taken a deep dive into what best practices tell us. I also want to talk about, before we head on to Ben, Andy Erstad online has said that that's great, as well as Chris has noted that this is a much more explicit and detailed and positive way to approach this. He really likes the breakdown of the MX and the transitions and affordability requirements. Frances has also noted that she appreciates the thought process and the changes that have been made in response to public input, especially appreciating the proposal to create that new O3 for the open space zone. So now we're caught up.
It seems like an unbelievable amount of work you guys have done in the last 30 days. So really impressive. And thank you very much. I just wanted to second, I think, Andy's comments on the mixed use zones. From what I just heard, it sounds fantastic. It addresses a lot of the concerns that I had. We talked last month about how there were really 4 mixed use zones previously, and it felt like a few of the zones that exist today were trying to be shoehorned in between. And I think expanding that to the 5 will really work well. I also feel like the increased height limits on some of these mixed use zones address some potential down zoning arguments that there were for like the LO and the RO zones, and also just help the city get towards its density goals. And then lastly, I think clustering some of the more intense development along the transit corridors makes so much sense. So I really like everything that I heard about the mixed use zones. Great work.
Is this on now? Okay. Yeah, I agree. Some really good updates. I love the affordability and sustainability piece. I especially appreciate that 50-year time frame. That's great. I do have one comment though on the planned public investment areas, and those are on existing corridors, transit corridors. If you spend any time riding the bus or trying to get from Southwest Boise into the downtown core, that is non-existent, folks. And so I just, we need density. Someone once told me that you need density in order to have a sustainable transit. We need transit in Southwest Boise. How do we achieve that in a way that is acceptable to the residents that live in that area in terms of density, but also in terms of providing a reliable transit system to move into the core and to other areas of the city?
I could just say that great comment, and I'll just add really quick. And I think Jessica, you probably have even more to add to that. But in our purpose statement for MX3, which said it defines like best in class transit, we say that this zone can be expanded as public investment is made and planned. So we would hopefully anticipate a future where we could have more access and more areas of planned public investment. But yeah, it was kind of trying to balance the comments we heard where we're just going everywhere, and instead let's be thoughtful and focused, but that we know there may be more planned public investment into the future, and that land use can follow that or work with that.
And I guess one follow-up to that is a lot of times the land has been developed. And yeah, I guess maybe, yeah, I guess maybe I just have a concern there, because a lot of times land use, like development has occurred. And so a sustainable transit system becomes a little more challenging to develop when you already have some level of, I don't know what the proper term is. I'm not a planner, but just, yeah, it makes it a little more challenging.
Deanna, on your comment, if a new transit corridor became established, like let's say Overland, would the onus be then on the individual property owners along that corridor to come in for a rezone, and it would just be heard by the city individually in the future?
I mean, I think we could, like, that may be a policy question. Jessica, did you have?
Yeah, well, I was thinking it's kind of tied to the process conversation too. So how do we approach requests for rezones? Or how do we proactively look at areas and think that it's right for, like, what are the conditions that would lead to a case to be made for a rezone along a corridor? I think that right now, with the way that we've treated the MX3, it's that the whole like chicken before the egg of you need density for transit, you need transit for density. The State, Vista, and Fairview are the three that are the best in class. So that is where there is the transit, the 15-minute headways. So we feel confident about the current MX3. But we have to kind of think through then, like, well, what does that transit service look like to become a new MX3? Like, is it the relationship with BRT and our agreements with them of like, if we're looking to change or invest in this corridor and make it a different kind of mixed use zone, what is the appropriate level of transit service we need to support that? And like, when does that happen? And I think this gives us a way to evaluate, like, is the condition right? Or if it's not, like, what other levers need to be pushed or pulled on?
And can I add, so in the MX2, you still have 45 feet, or yeah, is it 45? I knew this at one point minutes ago. Yeah, so you have the 45-foot height limit, and so it doesn't preclude, and there's no density calculation. So there can still be multifamily mixed use development there that could be transit supportive development. Is just not 60 feet. As well, you'll notice, like, a good example is Broadway. I think many people could agree that Broadway could be a best in class, node where we should be putting mixed use development there. And we think that probably there will be potential for a best in class transit route every 15 minutes. However, we don't have that now. But if you look on Broadway, we have activity centers. And so there's a couple of darker red on Broadway that will have those nodes, because that was identified in Blueprint Boise as those activity centers. So you can still build, and we see that kind of all over, even through Overland. There's the darker red activity centers. And that can help drive transit, but it's being more concentrated on where the more intense development can be at those activity centers, not along the entire corridor.
Sorry, is it still 1/8 of a mile from those activity centers?
The regional ones are 1/4. So Boise Town Square Mall, Micron, and the HP campus, those circles are a little bit larger.
Okay, let's hear from Brad, and then Marissa also would like to share her thoughts as well.
First of all, I'm really encouraged by what I just saw. I mean, and that's a lot coming from me, but no, I like the direction we're headed. So I'm really happy to see that we're slowing down a little bit, maybe rethinking this. But there's a number of things that I've been thinking about, but I won't hit them all right off the bat here. But you talked about this high investment areas. Maybe you can explain that a little bit more, but if we're going to invest in certain areas, and I know transit's always the concern, if we can get the busing there. I mean, are we going to remap the whole busing system to accommodate these areas that we want to, invest in? I know that there's something going on with the Boise or the bus system right now. There's some upheaval there with some management and changes there. And I understand that there's only like 30 people riding the bus right now every day. We've got a $25 million budget with the buses and 30 people a day ride them. So what are we doing to encourage people just to get on the bus? Whether we invest in it or not, how are we getting people on the bus? And I don't really understand this Vista 15-minute. You're saying the bus is going to show up every 15 minutes? Is that what it does now? Okay, I'm not aware. I'm just asking. And why is it only in that area that this is happening in? And while I'm on the bus subject, why don't we use busing for like the fair? We have thousands of people down at the fairgrounds. Why don't we utilize the busing to bring people in, have them park at the mall and have a special bus system for that? And I know that's not happening right now. So what are we doing to get people on the bus, really, is what my main point here is, because we're wasting a lot of money.
Well, I mean, since we're not VRT, we'll just speak to our right now in front of us opportunity with VRT, because change in leadership is always an opportunity. So Kelly, their executive director, is stepping down. And so there's an executive search committee being formed, and the city will be represented on that search committee. And I think that just creates this opportunity to have these conversations with them more so in a different way. Yeah, their board is. Yeah, but Boise contributes quite significantly to that budget. So I think, my goals in those conversations was I think preservation of service hours and growing service hours is the priority. So I don't know too much about what the bus is sitting around, but I do know that our priority would be growing ridership, maintaining growing ridership, increasing ridership. I mean, it's all about frequency and reliability. So how do we really start to push on that?
Brad, will you turn on your mic? Sorry, they can't hear you online. Thank you.
Maybe you could hear me, but there was a gal interviewed on Channel 7 who gave up her car for a week and walked for a while. Then she Ubered for a while, and then she got on the bus. She was the only one on the bus, and it took her an hour and a half to get 15 minutes away. So, I mean, that's the system that we have right now. So hopefully we can revamp that so that we can make this stuff work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a whole conversation about transit is something we could always have, but to be true to kind of getting your feedback on the land use side of the coin today would be really helpful, because it's just as important as the transit side. And then just that BRT isn't in the room. And so there's only so much that we can speak to technically as staff, but I will, yeah, I totally hear you. It needs to work. None of this works. Mhm. Yeah.
And I would say too, I think this strategy is not to get the new homes that are created along Vista to have that person only take the bus forever. But it's instead being realistic that they'll maybe have one car, and if there are a couple, maybe only one person needs a car, and they take the bus to work downtown because it's really easy to take the bus from Vista to downtown and back. But it's not so easy to take the bus from Vista to the Southwest. And we know that right now, but this system is really directing it so you can reduce some of your trips, maybe take the bus to work because you don't have a parking spot downtown like I do. I don't have a parking spot, so I can walk or take the bus. So it's kind of giving that choice and using land use to help create conditions where it's easier for people to take the bus.
Something else too, I just want to mention, and then I want to make sure you don't have your hand up for too long, but again, like Jessica said, looking at the land use part of it as well. I mean, how do we get people on the bus is a question that keeps many of us up all night, every night, because we love public transit and want to see it thrive. And it's so important to think about the land use part of it. And that was a really big part of our conversations as we tried to work through how these MX zones really work together to not only help to keep a variety of neighborhoods in our city, but to really create a system of connectivity where each piece of this puzzle is working together to help this strengthen. So we're strengthening the quality of our neighborhoods, and we're also strengthening the quality of our transit. So for example, when we talk about MX1, like a neighborhood, so you can see on the map that you have these small nodes where maybe it doesn't have a direct connection to a best-in-class transit route, but what an MX neighborhood can do is it can help to capture some of those automobile trips where instead of having to drive just to go to a coffee shop or drive just to get your groceries, now you can actually walk in your neighborhood. And that's going to increase that benefit for people that are living there. It also, thinking about the mixed use general, so it's maybe not on a best in class transit route, but one of the things we really took the time with as we were developing these zones, and hopefully we'll be able to get into this more as we get into the outreach later this summer, is thinking about what kind of pedestrian environments does mixed use need to have. So maybe it doesn't have a bus that comes every 15 minutes on it, but you're having quality sidewalks and quality urban tree canopies that allow people to comfortably walk. Whereas before, a 10-minute walk to a bus stop might be no freaking way, it's too hot out. Now it's comfortable and I actually enjoy it. So there's many different ways that we come together to support transit. It's a very multifaceted thing. And so I think it's a great question, but always the land use portion of it, as Jessica said, is every bit as important as thinking about the transit system itself.
Marissa, right before you go, Kelly online had said that she's not quite clear about the MX zones and has asked, so is MX1 the newly defined MXN? And yes, that is the case. So they ultimately, the conversion stays the same. But we have called it something a little bit different because we have integrated the new MX, and there was a lot of MXs that we were trying to keep track of. And so numerical seemed like the best approach. So Marissa, take it away, and then we will hear from Richard next.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Overall, I like the way this is going. I think there's a lot of things here that make sense. So I appreciate that. One, and I see things from more of a Southwest Boise lens, but when we talk existing transit versus planned transit, plans for various agencies change all the time and get delayed. And so I'm hesitant for the city to start rebuilding these neighborhood activity centers based on planned things. I prefer to see things that are firm and funded, and then we look at making changes versus 10, 20 years down the road, maybe we'll have this in place. I know that like State Street is a very intentionally planned corridor right now. Overland is not on anybody's radar as far as I can tell. So just, one of those differences between the cities. But overall, I like the way this is going.
I would just add that, so what's on the screen right now, the map, that is really reflective of today's reality. Like that is the corridors, activity centers, everything that's been in Blueprint Boise since 2011. So I think most of your comments too are really like good for us to consider about like how we move to plan for the future. And when we just say that, oh, well, now we're planning for Overland to be something different, like when does that actually occur then? It's not like it's an overnight flip of the switch. So we kind of have to create some rules around that. So thanks.
Richard and then Kelly.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Yeah, in general, this format, technically, it's working quite well. So everybody's clear and they have their own microphones. That's very helpful. So yeah, I think I can echo the sentiment of a lot of people. My neighborhood, I'm sure will appreciate the R1A remaining, at least as a zoning district. And I'd really like to understand more about this managed open space. That sounds interesting and potentially helpful, and how that kind of my guess was there when I saw it is that it kind of expands some of the intent of Foothills to other areas, especially south of the city. But I would like to hear more about that. As also, I'd like to, having seen a fire across Hill Road and everything up here last fall, like to kind of understand where that wildland urban interface zone will actually be. Kind of where is the interface? I guess that would be a question. And so, yeah, in general, I see these things as positive. I will kind of pile on a little bit here, though, regarding the bus thing, and not to beat it too much. But so when I hear State Street is best in class, and then we have 15-minute service, I hope you all remember that out past Gary Lane, to the west of Gary Lane, there are no bus stops until you get to the very end. So there's a 2-mile stretch there along State Street, between those two TOD nodes, in which there are no bus stops. So, it's as if we don't have any bus service, essentially, except for the very kind of corners there. And, yet we are building what we call TOD developments all along that corridor. So I'm a little concerned about the R2. Not that we don't want to have that. It's just that I'm afraid that if we zone things accordingly, we lose a lot of the incentive to get political buy-in and political, capital in a sense, to actually get, bus service, actually stopped buses, bus station, bus stops, etc. So I'm just throwing that out there. And then one thing that just came up, I just heard, one thing that we've tried to push for in my neighborhood is at least getting that multimodal path along State Street. So even if you're a mile away, if it's a relatively pleasant and efficient means of either walking or riding a bicycle, or who knows, a scooter, that's helpful. But when somebody just mentioned tree canopies, yes, that makes a big difference. And in our neighborhood, we were just seeing that we in areas that haven't been developed, we're getting power lines overhead where we never had them before. And of course, that means no big tree canopy. So that's happening, both along parks. Magnolia Park now has a new power line. And I guess what happens is it's between ACHD and Idaho Power. So you may not, Boise may not have a whole lot of influence there. But unfortunately, that does preempt the ability ever to have a big tree canopy. So that's something I never even thought about until it started to happen to us. So just throwing that out there, even though that's not really part of this. So thank you.
All right, Kelly, and then Ian has been patiently waiting, so we'll hear from him next, followed by Byron and then Drew.
Andrew, could I just really quick to Richard? I'm not going to respond to everything Richard said, but yes, to State Street, we have requirements for the multi-use path on State Street. So that's something we really want and can now with the code rewrite require along State Street. So that's definitely it. And then the WUI, we're using a layer that was mapped from fire. So it's the green is the WUI boundary. And I believe it's mostly Hill Road on the northern edge.
And that was a joint venture for the city of Boise and Ada County in the 1990s. And so we'll be making sure that we're bringing that to the forefront. Oftentimes it's lost and people don't have an understanding of what that is and what they can do to help prevent wildfire, to help cohabitate with our flora and fauna in those areas. And so it is an important piece that we'll bring forward, not only for public safety, but for us to also cohabitate well. Kelly, did you want to?
For me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the incentives for affordable housing in the R2 and R3 zones. Because you were talking about how in the R1 zones, in order to allow fourplexes and triplexes and so forth, there was an incentive for, affordability and sustainability. So is there any sort of incentives that are still going to be in place for the higher density areas that already allow that type of housing to encourage affordable housing units?
Kelly, I think that's a great point. We don't have the incentives currently as proposed, but I think that's something we can explore because our idea was we want to see growth in those more urban neighborhoods because that's kind of that's the framework, right? To have the variety. And so we're more restrictive in the lower density areas. So we want to encourage any new development or growth within those more urban neighborhoods. But I mean, we can think about it more of what would be an effective incentive within those neighborhoods.
Yeah, because I mean, we already, like in our neighborhood, we already have one project that was, CCDC and so forth. And, it seemed to have a really nice model of the types of, the number of units and sort of a sliding scale of, availability and who would be able to qualify based on the size of the unit and that sort of thing. And I just think that people that want to live near downtown, and when we're talking affordable, we're also talking about what like real people can afford, right? It's not low income, it's just affordable. And so, having something that would be an option or some sort of incentives in the more urban areas, I think that would be really great.
To clarify or maybe pose a question based off what Kelly was just asking, I think there were some density increases in the MX zones, but maybe it wasn't affordability based, maybe it was sustainability based. That was proposed previously. Is that still in the works or?
I think maybe we do have we do have the incentive for the MX4, and I believe we're thinking about adding it also for MX3. But I thought Kelly was asking about R2 and R3. We don't have yet in the code for anything in R2 and R3.
Got it. Okay. And I guess to circle back to the activity centers, way back in the start of the conversation, maybe what Esther was starting to point out, how do we create or not create a feedback loop where areas that are being invested in now aren't going to keep seeing more investment because they're on transit corridors? I appreciate and completely understand what was being proposed, and I think it's a great solution. Just throwing that out there.
That was good. And I think we're going to have to reevaluate things on a relatively regular basis. How does our bus system develop? How does it get better? As things become best in class, I think you're going to have to constantly revisit those. And it may require that we then reclassify things as a city to a different zone. But to avoid the down zoning, I think it's going to progressively move up the ladder rather than down.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And I guess train of thought, I don't know if this makes any sense or it comes anywhere close to something we can point out or do. Are there development zones? I know this probably isn't zoning related, but are there zones where we can encourage economic development? I don't know that you can write that into zoning code, or maybe that's, I don't know, not necessarily policy based, but.
Well, one thing I would say to that, yes, that's a really good point. And it is always a struggle when we're thinking about zoning of like kind of what is the purview of the zoning code, right? Because it touches everything. And yet it also has limitations for what specifically it handles. But to that point, I think what we're really trying to do with this framework, and has informed a lot of our work on it, is trying to create a clear path for all of those other kinds of activities. So whether it's the transit system or whether it's economic development, we're creating a very clear framework to show how, as a city, we can support and when we're able to, can lead those efforts, as opposed to everything just kind of being in the soup, so to speak.
And I'm going to talk about just a conversation we all had, which was how to, and there's like big economic development, recruiting, big employers and whatnot. And then there's the small economic development of enabling local entrepreneurs to have their own cafe space. They're like, making it easier to do the smaller things. And when we went back through the use table and some of our dimensional standards, we kind of wanted to approach it with the favor of making it easier for smaller things to happen. So I didn't really touch on this too much. This was to some degree allowed in the previous draft, but like the neighborhood market cafe. So having really small scale things so that a Boisean could have their own cafe nearby, get more affordable property and use that instead of only a big Chili's, no offense to Chili's, being able to like figure out the parking, the design, all of that. Like, how can we spur that type of Boise economic development?
Oh, and I wanted to touch on too, since the slide is up, when we're talking about these affordability and sustainability requirements, it's not an or, it's an and. So we're saying that if we're allowing for an R1A or R1B, the triplex, fourplex, townhome, and then R1C, the triplex, fourplex, it's not a list that you can choose from. If we really want to be intentional that it's sustainability and affordability, both of those are required. And we kind of lessen the soup mixing. We just intentionally said what it is that we'd like to see happen. And to view those two is that if you are then going to build this different kind of product in those neighborhoods, there's a public benefit that would be realized because of those requirements put on it. And that there's a way that you're contributing to the neighborhood and to the community through those enhancements.
Yeah.
I'm next. All right. Thank you. Great slide to be on too, because this is what I wanted to talk about. So I'm wondering if it seems like we rolled back the the fairly progressive residential zone, some of the things that were teased out in module 2, was that because of public comment?
I think it was a combination of many things. So it was public comment led to that just a little bit. But as we did a deeper dive, and actually, for those of you that might be familiar, the Urban Land Institute actually selected the city of Boise to participate in a housing forum, and they took a deep dive into what our programs are, and they brought in specialists from all over. And they specifically told us that, a number of jurisdictions have eliminated single family dwellings in those single family residential zones, and they're just not seeing things to come to fruition. And so they said, that's really not where you're going to see the most impact. And so they said, really focus on those areas where you can get those higher densities, where you can get people close to their services, where they have transit. And so these are experts, they have learned from other people. And so we don't want to reinvent that wheel. So if we're not going to get a lot of juice for that squeeze, we'd like to move on and really focus on where we can get that juice.
Yeah, okay. So just to clarify, the density limits come back. Are those in addition to the form-based requirements that are currently in module 2 for like small multifamily with open space requirements per unit and things like that?
Yes, and you'll see that density only came back for R1A, B, and C. So R2 and R3 still have, that open-ended, and they'll be based more on that functional piece. So if you can meet the setbacks and the building height and all of those use-specific standards that talk about form and bulk, then go ahead and build in those locations. That's where we want them to be.
Yeah, okay. So I guess one thing I would say, so I love the mixed use. I think the mixed use is trucking along really well. I just wanted to put that out there too. I loved what I saw there. I've been doing a lot of case studies specifically around R1B and R1C, trying to find some missing middle housing types that'll fit with what previously we saw as module 2. I'll adapt some of those for these density limits, but I can already tell you that a number of those are going to be kind of impossibilities now. Things like cottage courts, small multifamily, the affordable and sustainable requirements that are on duplex or on triplexes and fourplexes. I guess I would question how the housing bonus density plan or program went or has been going internally, and kind of find out what are the limiting factors with that program, because we aren't seeing a lot so far. And I know that it's fairly early in its, in its work. But I'm wondering if some of the market requirements are some of those limitations for why we haven't seen more of those projects come out. And I would seriously hope that we wouldn't limit the triplex and fourplex under the same kind of assumptions about the kind of top-down control for affordability, because some of those housing units are already kind of more affordable to build than things like duplexes and single-family homes already. So from the perspective of, say, a small local builder, or a homeowner builder who wants to do a project like a triplex or a fourplex on their property, what we've done from the current code to what's proposed here is increased the complexity of that process quite a bit and built more cost in on developing a thing like a fourplex already, which was already kind of like a small builder sort of scaled project for them to do. So I kind of worry about that, honestly. Not to mention the density limits on R1C. I totally get why we have R1A and B back under those controls. But R1C at 12 units per acre is pretty draconian, especially for this time in history. So, and I have a couple other comments too, but
I'm just curious. I want to follow up. So the
Yeah.
R1C density, so shifting that from 8 dwelling units to the acre to the 12, do you think that gives us some leverage, or do you think that we're still in that box?
a little bit, because it's almost like if you go with Euclidean I know we were trying to hybrid approach with Euclidean and form-based, but now it kind of seems like, at least for R1C and maybe R1B, we have the worst of both, at least the way I've been working some of the case studies. I can make quite a lot work if I'm just going form-based with an R1C, like a cottage court, something like that. Those are highly popular. But the density limit has always been kind of an arbitrary limit, right? It's always kind of an abstract limit of units per acre that it didn't really ever equate to much. And it did certainly make things like cottage courts and small, medium-sized, neighborhood-sized multifamily projects illegal for the decades, for the intervening decades when that came to pass. But I can make everything work on the form-based approach, but the density limit's the thing that like will kill the project right from the beginning because it's a hard pass, right? So I guess I'm gonna make some comments about that. I think that's the one thing that I see more than anything. I like the height limits; they're really helpful. The triplex and fourplex, incentives. I think we just have to really study the housing density bonus program to find out what has made that artificially limited and make sure that we don't do that to the triplexes and fourplexes.
Okay. And I have one follow-up question with that. So I think R1C, the 12 units per acre is based off of, because the allowed uses are single family, it's basically where you have to have a lot, and 12 is an acre divided by 3,500 in this case. So it would be if we expanded allowed uses in R1C to allow small scale multifamily, then that density limits the cap because a duplex isn't subject to the density requirement. And or when we have the incentive for the fourplex or the triplex is also not subject to the density limit. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think it was mostly, there aren't a myriad, but there are a lot of other different housing types that kind of fall into that missing middle category. The ones that we said that we wanted to prioritize, that eliminates all of those or a lot of them. And I'm kind of off the cuff trying to calculate those too based on the case studies I'm doing, but I'll go back and check and just verify, but it seems like it would.
Yeah, thanks for everything you've done since we last met. This is great work. I have a kind of a list of questions. Maybe I'll ask a couple and just pause. On the MX5, I think is what my question. Yeah. Am I correct in that would be essentially the entire downtown planning area? Or is there still a differentiation of zones within the downtown planning area?
And I could pull up a zoomed in, but if you were previously zoned C2, C3, C4, C5, and RO in the downtown planning area, you become MX5. Okay. There's some areas near Boise State, or not, sorry, Boise High that are LO. Those will become MX1. We did not upzone those.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And I think I had a comment about, I think the conversation about transit is a great one. I wonder if we can somehow embed the type of future proofing performance standard to where if service increases to a quantifiable number along a corridor, that you have a procedural path to smoothly rezone based on, because that's out of our control, really. I mean, we can work in close coordination as possible with VRT, but I mean, they may identify a corridor that starts to evolve. And if we have a procedural process that responds to that, maybe that's kind of a way of thinking about what we've discussed. I share a lot of Byron's concerns, honestly, about the R1C. I think the way I'm processing it quickly today is that the direction this is going is good. I like, the key messaging. And I think what we're honing in on is zoning in areas where it's appropriate and there's a kind of a carrying capacity for it. Many of our near employment, near downtown zones do have that R1C zone. And that's where we have carrying capacity to see density. And I think there's ways of walking through that. Byron's ideas are great. I wonder if there's more opportunity to look at what you're proposing with R2 as it relates to proximity to some of these corridors and activity centers, to where that buffer is broader. And we stretch that to where we're creating a little bit more of a reach in those areas where they have that capacity to handle the growth, the density, and you can much more easily say, I'm within walking distance to that bus route, to that grocery store, to my desk that I have to get to. I do see the change to R1C as detrimental to a lot of those creative missing middle solutions that we've been talking about previously. And I do worry with the, as admirable as the affordability and sustainability requirements are, they may actually act in many cases as a detriment to that type of development from happening. But it's a needle that's going to be hard to thread. I don't know. I'm not proposing any silver bullet for that one, but I've been in the mindset with the form-based direction that we've been heading. A lot of those types of products, like the cottage courts, fourplexes, you name it, would fit really well within the fabric of those neighborhoods like they have historically. So I'll just kind of stop there and echoing some of what Byron said. My final comment or question is on R3. If you could go back to that slide. It says 1,500 for attached and then 5,000 for other. Am I looking at it in the same way that it would be 5,000 for detached in R3?
I believe that you recommended earlier that we not allow single family in the R3, and that will be a change that we will be heading.
Okay. So what's other? Is that like a multifamily?
Multifamily.
Okay, great. Okay. I think that's it for me right now. So, no, height limits. Is there a way of almost like, in a visual sense, communicating what that gains us? It's 5 feet. What is that gaining us? Is it even a floor? Is it?
Well, Byron has been doing some, so we've been examining, what are wall plates, what are floor plate, what does a floor plate look like? What do roofline structures when you have different pitches, and then actually your foundation too. So whether you're slab on grade or actually built up. So he's been evaluating that. So we want to ensure that you can get a taller floor plate that's 3 stories, always in the 35. When you get to 45, that you can do a 4-story that is very clear. Because we've also identified a measurement difference as well. So previously in the existing code, it says that you measure to the midline of your roof. The new code says we're measuring to the peak. And so we want to make sure that we can accommodate for those 3 stories and 4 stories. And I think we're confident that we can do that in those.
When you say peak, are you talking about the peak of the roof or a parapet or
the highest
screening
point
or-
of the structure? However, there will be some exceptions that are allowed to exceed that. So if you have an elevator tower, if you have an antenna,
Canopies,
things that
yes,
maybe
so-
don't add to the square footage of the actual building, but they're a necessity.
Is there a variable in the height requirement by how close a property is or the building is to a property line or an existing building? Does that vary in the distance from, or is that an absolute? You can have 50 feet right on the property line.
No, your setbacks would talk about, how your height is set on the property. And so your setbacks are going to identify how far that building is going to be placed from that setback. the building height would allow you to go to whatever the allowable height is within that zone.
I was just going to ask really quick while we're on that topic, was there a reason that in the code we didn't go with limiting the number of stories versus just an overall gross height? Or is the concern really about projections beyond something like a 3-story building or a 4-story building?
I think that just we utilized an actual measurement. So
Yeah, because we saw that there was an overlap between some like a very large 2-story building and a very small 3-story building, right? There's a lot of,
yep.
they can almost be the same thing. So that's why I ask. Yeah, okay.
All right, let's go to Roberta and then Ben and then Ian.
I also want to echo that I really appreciate all the work that's been done. And I also really appreciate the amount of time we have for this conversation. A lot of times in the past meetings, transportation is an ongoing issue and it comes up as a topic. And I know it's not directly related to what we're doing, but is there an opportunity either as a separate meeting for someone from VRT to talk to us about their planning process, just for our own purposes, since it always, I don't think I've been to a meeting. I mean, it just seems to come up a lot because that impacts how we develop our growth. So it's a suggestion, ask, whatever.
Let us see what we can do. We have, a number of different transportation agencies. Obviously, transit is a key, but, moving vehicles as well. So that could go to CHD, ITD. So let us think about how we can address that and get you the information that you're looking for.
I'll clarify. I'm more interested in the bus.
Transit.
Yeah, the
Okay.
VRT type transit, not, the roads. That's
a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah.
We're gonna make sure we have time before 5 to talk about our outreach strategy. And then when we come back to you in June, what conversation that looks like and in July. So like maybe within that, we can also see about how we have a VRT person come, or does it need to be a different forum for them to talk about how they go about their planning?
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
You guys have done a ton of outreach and gotten a lot of feedback from the community. I'm curious what you think the feedback will be from the public on the corridor conversion to the R2, what you think the public is going to think of that. And that was my original question. Then I liked what Drew had to say. And as a follow-on to that question, could that 1/8 of a mile potentially be pushed out to a 1/4 mile? If that's 2 blocks to get more of the missing middle opportunities in the R2.
So we strongly debated on whether an 1/8 was appropriate or whether a 1/4 mile was appropriate. We wanted to evaluate how many parcels we were impacting. And then the other thing is to clearly be able to draw a line. So where does that happen? Does that happen at the alley or does that happen at the street? And from our public impact that we heard, it is that people really have a concern about that interface between commercial and residential. And so we want to make it as smooth as possible. We want to enable development, but we also want to support those people that have been there. And so it's really difficult. We've heard it a couple of times, so maybe that is something that we do have to evaluate further and take a look at. How the public will react, I don't know. We heard that they want development where infrastructure is and where investment has occurred. And so, those things are very, very clear. Oftentimes we hear that, yes, we want affordable housing, but whoa, we don't want that near us. I think that that'll probably be, the voice that we hear. But I don't know, some people may be excited that they have new opportunities, so.
Andrew, if I could comment on that, and as being a member on DR too, I think there's going to be pushback to expand, go from an eighth to quarter, half, wherever, especially along State Street. I saw that at DR with Shellen's project, great project near Taft Elementary. And there's just a fringe there, or not a fringe, that's not the right word. There's just an area there that are larger lots, older community, beautiful neighborhood. And there's folks that are really concerned about losing their quality of life that they currently have. So I totally agree with you 100% about that missing middle, but I think there will be pushback along State Street, along to the north of State Street about expanding that boundary, if you will. And I didn't get a chance to chime in. If I could add a couple other comments. Economic development, I think that's really important. And I think CCDC and the URDs can potentially help with that. And I think that's probably a great mechanism. And my question to the team is I'm assuming as we're looking at these changes, we're also looking at the urban renewal districts to see if they're impacted or not, good or bad, or maybe some areas need to grow or shrink potentially. What are we doing about neighborhoods today that I would classify as affordable? And I'll be very specific because again, being on DR, I see some stuff, especially happening in the airport area, Blue Valley. And it's zoned industrial. It's an affordable neighborhood. Kind of got the raw deal on the whole, how they were annexed into the city a long time ago before our time. But I'd like to see that community protected somehow because I think it's very vulnerable and they're providing it's affordable housing, or it's a very affordable community right now. And I think it should be preserved. And I got to believe there's other communities out there. How do we protect them and preserve them? And then excited about the open area. The first thing I thought of when you showed us that map is like an urban growth boundary. That's kind of what I see it becoming. And I think that's a good thing potentially for us. But as planners, you guys might have different thoughts. Maybe that's not the right word to use here because I know it's a bad word in Washington, but excited about that too. So those are all my comments.
Design review.
Design review.
Is there someone in the queue for a question?
Sure.
I didn't know if someone was like up next. I was just going to say, like, I know there will be pushback, but if we talk about the direction the community wants to head and the vision, if don't develop everywhere is one of the key 4 or 5 things to that, I think that does require like a really hard conversation of, well, where do we develop and what does that look like? And I think stretching that R2 should be part of that conversation, or looking at things like we've talked about with R1. And I'm buying into that. I think it's a great vision or tenet of this whole overall thing, but you've got demand in 2 cylinders. And when you reduce it from 1, you've got to accommodate for it elsewhere. And I think those corridors and those areas of investment that you've identified is the best place to start.
So when we talk about, not developing everywhere, so of course it does talk to the perimeter, which does include our foothills. But we often, when we go out to the public, always the thing that we hear is that protect our foothills, protect our river. And so we also need to be looking at that, making sure that we're really protecting or enhancing that, because our community really does feel like that is one of our greatest assets. So thinking beyond the perimeter, also internally, as far as our river system, our floodplain permitting system, those types of things as well.
How much influence do we have over Garden City and what they're developing down by the river?
None.
None.
No, that's outside. They are an entity of their own, so they have their own guiding documents. So yes, they will develop Now, the other thing is when we talk about those things is we have Garden City, we have connections to Meridian, Star, Eagle. And so we will have to make sure that, we are creating, smooth transitions as we enter and exit cities. And so, there will have to be some coordination that goes. And so, we have invited them and we do send them all of our updates and our documents when we release them so that they can understand which direction we're heading as well. So.
Can I ask one more question? Could somebody explain sustainability to me a little bit?
So our Public Works Division has been working really, really hard, and our mayor has ultimately stated that our city will be carbon neutral by 2050. And so that will be, reducing emissions, that will be using quality products, making sure that the energy resources that we're utilizing are renewable resources and not necessarily our non-renewable resources. So electricity versus natural gas, those types of things. Really valuing our water, making sure that our aquifer is replenished and maintains its current levels. So really taking care of our earth and making sure that our imprint is a good one and not a negative one.
And I would just add, when we think about like our impact as a city at a local level, some of our greatest causes of emission is transportation and building, and which is like heating your building and then the materials you use. So when we think about what can we do from land use to help reduce emissions at the local level, is adjusting our building materials so that they're more efficient. So we don't have to use as much energy to heat our house or cool our homes, and making it compact so that we don't have to travel as far distances to get to places by using a gas car.
And I obviously we were in communication with Idaho Power on all these matters because Idaho Power's, obviously you got to power charging stations and, economical building and all that kind of stuff. So they're all involved in all these conversations.
Yes, they have been invited to the table as well. They're sent this document. So all of our utilities, all of our irrigation, all of our transportation entities, whether they're VRT or ACHD, ITD, hospitals, school districts, we have kept that very, very broad. And so, we've invited them to the table. Some of them haven't come. So we're going to go knocking on their door here shortly. So, Ian.
While we're on the topic of sustainability, I wanted to circle back to something Byron said about the affordable and sustainable requirement, deterring some smaller developers. I agree with that. But I think it's a good way to move the needle forward. I think they will have to adapt to get to that point. Having worked in other cities, there are smaller developers that they get there. It might take a while and they might not be happy about it, but I think it's a good thing. Question maybe first for you all is, are there any like legal and potential issues with putting that in the zoning code? I mean, I know the state of Idaho has been kind of resistant to some of the affordable measures in other cities.
As long as things are presented as an option, so you can go that route. It's not an exaction. It's not an inclusionary type thing, as long as it is that option. And so people have the option to develop this way, or we can give you something a little bit extra if you're willing to go the extra mile for us. And we talked about this quite significantly internally too. And so not only thinking about today, but where will we be in 2050? And so, as land values increase, is there the ability to reinvest into some of those smaller properties or existing structures to actually reutilize them or adaptively reuse them?
Can I clarify really quickly? Thank you, Ian, for reminding me. The sustainability standards, I think, are a great way to do that. In fact, it was mostly the affordability math, just making sure that we have input from people like Shellen, our other local developers, so that they've had some oversight with those numbers. The sustainability issue, though, to your other point, we're years behind the national standards for energy requirements for our buildings, and that's artificially set by the state of Idaho. So I think anything that we can do on that front would be really helpful. So thanks for bringing that up.
We do have Richard as well online. So once Richard is complete, we'll go to Roberta.
Great, thank you. I wanted to follow up with a comment about Blue Valley, which I appreciated. Just recently, there was an article out in Grist. The title was "How Outdated Zoning Codes Are Fueling the Sprawl of E-commerce Warehouses," and it was specifically talked about, environmental justice issues with light industrial warehouses, and how essentially zoning codes haven't kept up with our knowledge about the impact of diesel, et cetera, on nearby residential areas. And right now, we are wrapping, we have this new I-1 zone, which, folds in what was light industrial as well as T1 and T2, and T2 being, large, Amazon style size of e-commerce warehouses. And yes, places like Blue Valley are not protected from that. And, they used to be protected, even though I know Blue Valley is kind of an odd situation in that, it is zoned light industrial itself. But before we simplified some of the language about 10 years ago in the zoning code, and for those of you who aren't aware, there was actually a lot of rewriting of the language in the zoning code. And it used to say, before 10 years or so, that light industrial had to be sensitive to things. It listed out the adverse impacts, and it said things like dust, fumes, et cetera, things like that you could very easily tie to, diesel trucking within 100 feet or so of a residential area. But that was removed. That language was removed in the name of simplifying. And so now it just says something like an adverse impact. And so now we've lost that ability to to kind of precisely identify those impacts. So yeah, I see this as a problem. We haven't talked about it today, but that wrapping of and collapsing of multiple industrial zones into I-1, not just for Blue Valley, but will impact others too. Thank you.
Where's Blue Valley?
If you could, Eisenman Road. So if you continue down past our outlet malls, it's a manufactured home community that's out there. It's really nice. Roberta, did you want to take it away?
I like the concept of incentives. That's our best option for affordability housing and such. How does that change over time as far as the economics? Is there a scale that's built in, or how does that work? Because 10 years from now, the economy might be different.
Are you talking about the requirement for rent or just the percent?
Builders, like if I understand it correctly, when we're talking about providing incentives to have affordable housing or that type of thing, how does that change over time?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good question. I was going to speak to the rents being tied to the area median income, and that changes every year. So, so as a community or as wages change, the rent you can charge changes as well every year. And that's released annually by the Housing and Urban Development from the federal government. And we have that on the city's website. So 60% or for the triplex, floorplex, we required it at 80% AMI, which is less than half of what Boise residents own. And I knew this at one point. I think it's a little bit over 40,000 a year for a family of 3. And then for the more urban, the MX4 incentive, it's at 60% AMI. So getting even more deeply affordable units there.
Thanks.
How is that enforced?
We have, so what will happen will be there's a deed restriction. So as they build the triplex or fourplex, in order to get your building permits, you have to have a recorded deed restriction with the county, and it spells out the affordability covenant. And then in that covenant, it has a requirement for monitoring every year where they have to submit a report to the city, and we monitor it. And we're exploring options as if this is so popular that it's beyond the city's capacity to monitor, there's partners we can use.
Deanna, can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
This is for all product types, correct? Meaning rental and homeownership?
Correct. So can you be more specific on what you're referring to?
Can you go back to this? Sorry. Can you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. The
yeah.
residential affordable here, that first bullet, does that apply to both rentals and homeownership opportunities?
Yes. So by definition, a triplex and a fourplex is a rental product because it's it's a rental and they're all on the same lot. However, you could make attached single family homes on that same lot and subdivide it, and those could be ownership opportunities. And our requirement for that is less than 120% AMI.
Okay. I don't want to get nitpicky, but I do this for a living. And this works really well for a rental product. That deed restriction gets incredibly complicated in a homeownership product, especially if you're only enforcing it on an annual basis.
Yeah, and we have heard that comment. We also learned through the ULI Technical Advisory Committee that there's an ability, and we've had actually a couple developers approach us previously about this, to deed it to an income or to sell it to, say, NeighborWorks or a land trust, in which they can hold the ownership of the product, and they have a affordable homeownership program that they can work through.
I think it's going to the point that was just made a minute ago, and I'll say it a little differently, but it is an incredibly difficult, and we've seen it in many, many communities, difficult to hold on to those deed restrictions. So just there's lots of people that work on this in the industry, but just be very mindful of those words and how they're protected, because they go very often in homeownership opportunities. I know Drew in his experiences in snow country in Colorado have certainly seen this. So that's just a hey, FYI, this is tough stuff. Be super careful. It's not the same deed restriction, and going to NeighborWorks will certainly take your value down and provide some other challenges that the city might face, or that the developer might face, that are maybe unthought through at this point. It's just something to be aware of.
Can I ask Shellen a question really quickly? Shellen, can you hear me? This is Byron.
Hi, Byron.
How are you doing?
Awesome.
Good. Hey, does that change anything if we were talking about, say, a fourplex that is condominiumized as a single building? Does anything change with your answer?
No. I think what changes is how the city would. No, it doesn't change in regards to the deed restriction. The deed restriction will be difficult to enforce, and it happens all the time. Deed restrictions are enforced all the time on homeownership and condominium projects. it is just very important that they are actually enforced, and title companies, sorry, Hillary, are not very good at it.
Even with the association, I guess the building being owned by an association, that doesn't simplify things and turn it into one of those products that's kind of almost between a rental and an ownership product.
It's an ownership product.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and we could talk more about this, but this has been done in Boise, where you work with a land trust. I mean, it's not been realized to the maximum capacity because we haven't had, it's been really based in philanthropy and goodwill. But this would be something to test to see if we could get some homeownership affordable product.
Yeah, but like, for example, the NeighborWorks single family sites, it's over in Garden City, but I mean, that just sold for $750,000 because it was the second homeowner.
Yeah.
So the first homeowner, you know, the deed, if there was a deed restriction, it was not, it wasn't met. Happens all the time.
And this is Hillary. I don't take any offense at that because A, I'm no longer a title company, and B, it's not a title company's job. So no problem. But I will second what Shellen is saying, that from a legal perspective, those are very tricky to enforce. When your only remedy is bringing a legal action against somebody else, there are myriad impediments to that actually happening.
It just really begs the upfront programmatic support to have any unit that's created, I think, to be as much as possible into a unified program to where these added units are tracked consistently and in more of a single location. And yes, it's complicated, but I think that creates a huge question for the city. Is that the city, or is it another agency in the area that you could work in partnership to fold all these units under more of one umbrella to lower the risk of something sliding out of the system, especially on the ownership side?
And to be fair, it probably isn't a zoning issue. I mean, to be fair, the words in the zoning code can say that, and then it's the programmatic issue that to Drew's point. So sorry if I just went down a rabbit hole, but I think it's an important thing to really get your head around as a community and a city.
No, I think these long-term implications are important to evaluate. You know, not only if we can't enforce it or it's difficult, then, you know, maybe it's not being done right, or, you know, we don't need to make the same mistake as another community has. So I don't want to cut off the discussion, but we do want to tell you what's coming up next before we leave today. And then we also have two attendees that are out there. I am not sure if they'd like to participate in the conversation, but we'll go ahead, and if they want to, then please let us know. But let's listen to our next steps, and then we can hear from our attendees, and then we can continue conversation if we have any time left.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Andrea. This is just kind of our last slide for the day on kind of what our next steps moving forward. This is really the first time that we've shared with the community where we've been and what we've been up to. We've been very busy, and I have to give huge compliments to this group because they've had huge work sessions over the last month that has been a lot of time and effort, and really us listening to the community and you all and taking that to heart to try and make some of these changes. So what's next? Basically, we have decided that, you know, we didn't get module 1 and module 2 right. And so we didn't feel comfortable moving forward into module 3 outreach this summer. So this is kind of our way of saying, okay, we didn't get this right. We need to make changes, and we need to share that with the community before we can continue to move forward with this process. And so what that will look like is this summer, July 14th, 18th, and 28th, we'll do some open house style. We have a lot more planners that we've kind of brought in to this entire process as well. It'll be more of an open house style, just because doing module 1 and module 2 all together would be really hard to do a presentation kind of like we did before. So we'll kind of probably do it more topic focused, that will have each planner that's more nuanced and more of an expert, specifically if it's mixed use zones, if it's parking, residential areas, whatever that might look like. We're still going to work out, because we're continuing to send edits to Clarion and they're continuing to come back to us. So it's more of a fluid process now. We're excited about that, but you know, we have a timeline that we also need to keep moving forward, and then still plan to do some module outreach later in the fall as well. So that is it for us. We'll give you more details as we finalize over the next couple weeks what these look like and locations. Again, we'll have a lot more staff kind of on hand as well. And we're excited about sharing some of these updates. As we've said, as Tim kind of said, you know, we feel a lot more confident standing behind these changes than we did kind of in our last outreach. And those of you that attended that, you know, it was a long outreach period for us, but that's why we did it. And I really think that we took those comments to heart. And now we're excited to present these in the summer and then keep this process moving forward. So Andrea, I'll let you take it over from here.
All right. It looks like Gary Haynes would like to share his comments, but I'm not sure how I can let him share with us.
It usually says like move to.
Nope. While we're trying to figure that out, did anybody else have any final parting comments? Yeah.
I have a question. If we're going to continue to do this here, where do you park?
You can park in the parking garage and actually
The one that's right here?
actually, I think any of them, and we do have the ability to validate your parking.
Okay. I might have a ticket.
This, I'll just go to the point that we got compliments on this area. Our typical third Thursday of the month, council chambers is not available. So we pushed this one. It gave us an extra week to kind of get some of these things in order too. So whether we have to reevaluate if that changes from the third Thursday, we know this is the best capabilities to do a hybrid portion. But if we have to adjust this meeting, just bear with us because this is booked a lot, obviously, and for our commissions and city council and everybody else. But this works the best for our facilities that we have right now. But anyway.
Figure out how to promote him. And maybe Greg can help us promote Gary Haynes so that he can have the opportunity to speak to us. Any other thoughts? We're trying.
I'd be a great host so he can.
Yeah. Our IT is working. Ta-da.
Aha. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome, Gary.
Hi. Just a couple things. One of the things I'm concerned about with the affordability and sustainability requirements, and this kind of goes to, I think, some of Byron's comments and maybe Shellen's. But it seems to me that those affordability and sustainability requirements could become disincentives to doing what you want to have done there in terms of producing affordable housing. And unless it's supported by funding in some way, unless that you've done the calculation, done some economic analysis on it to show that in fact, allowing those kinds of densities produces the kinds of returns or whatever that people would be looking for so they would want to do those kinds of things, do that affordable housing and do those densities and additional units. The other thing and this is actually kind of counter to what my concern is I'm wondering if on where those sustainability and affordability requirements are laid on additional units on in those zones, wondering if it would also make sense to add accessibility in some aspect or visitability to those requirements. So that was really it. I like what you're doing. So I really think the TOD stuff is really important. So anyway, keep up the good work.
Thanks, Gary. And just to kind of add on to the accessibility topic, we have heard from our disability task force here at the City of Boise, and they've provided us a number of comments to increase visitability, to really make sure that all of our amenities are usable by people of all abilities. And so we are taking a deep dive into how we can provide opportunity for everybody to experience the city of Boise equitably. So. Well, any parting thoughts that anybody would like to share? Did we like today's format? Do we want to try it again?
I thought today's format was really good. I'm sorry, I was really hoping to be there in person, but couldn't make it. But yeah, this was really good.
I have to look at the calendar extensively. This happened to work because the third Thursday is booked by another group. I can't remember which one. I think it might be Parks Commission. Yeah. So it's another commission that's on the third Thursday. So I see to see if there's the fourth Thursday moving forward. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And we'll try and be in contact as much as possible ahead of time. This one, we decided right away, okay, if we can move it one more week, that gave us an extra week to get everything together, and this room was available. So.
Oh, yeah, and to bring up then in June, whether it's the third or the fourth Thursday, our hope would be is that we have the revised draft back from Clarion by that date, and then we can look at this all in a lot more. There's so much detail, and to really, I mean, thank you all for your time and your comments, but to thank staff too. It has been a lot of work, and they have done a wonderful job. And I hope you see it, because it's gone to a really great place.
Andrea, this is Andy Erstad. I would echo what was just said. Staff's done a fabulous job, and I like this forum that we can do in the split session. I'm quarantining because COVID has struck our household, and so rather than create this as a super spreader, I thought I'll zoom in, and it works well. I want to just make one comment, and that is we spent a lot of time talking about transportation and an element that this zoning ordinance will support, but doesn't really have the authority or the ability to solve. And so someone made a comment, and I thought it was a great comment. Can we get ACHD, Compass, and VRT kind of at the table, at least, part of the discussion? And I think that'll go a long ways to help support and make the efforts that we're doing now more realistic and meaningful, if you will. This process, and I really like the forum today and the format, and I thought the comments from everyone around the table were insightful and informative, and it's been an important aspect for all of us to know that staff has taken this back to Clarion and looking at many of the components that were brought up in the neighborhood meetings. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for your time, and we're going to see what we can do to get some guest speakers and to see if we can't secure this room maybe on the fourth Thursday of the month, but we'll keep you in the loop so that you have ample time to plan accordingly. So thank you.
Thank you.